Hi, everyone. Today we're talking about the role of actuaries making a difference in government social services. And joining us for this conversation today is David Gifford. David
Hi,
is, hi, David,
hi,
um,
Julia.
joining us from your car today. So David, for those of you who don't know, is the Scheme Actuary for the NDIS. David's an experienced actuary, having worked for nearly 30 years across social insurance, general insurance and government in both consulting and organisational roles. He was previously the Chief Strategy Officer and the Chief Risk Officer at the TAC and held consulting roles for more than 15 years at both PwC and Quantium. David has a Bachelor of Economics and an MBA from Melbourne Business School and is currently undertaking a Master of Public Health at Melbourne Uni. So, David, thanks so much for joining us today for this conversation.
Thank you again for having me, Julia.
So, David, you've recently been appointed as the Scheme Actuary for the NDIS. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and what that entails?
For sure, yeah. Well, look, the Scheme Actuary does a few things, Julia. The role, I guess, the one that's most visible and most prominent to people is projecting the cost of the NDIS, which is, I guess, in a way, the most actuarial part of the role. It's similar to the work of a lot of actuaries do, but obviously the organisation that we're talking about, the NDIS, is it's one that gets a lot of scrutiny. So I guess that's the part of the role that I guess a lot of people would get to see at least a little bit of. There's a whole lot of.
And David, for our international listeners, can you give us a quick overview of what the NDIS here in Australia does?
For sure, yeah. Sorry, probably should have started there. So the National Disability Insurance Scheme has been around for just under 10 years, although only has really got to, I suppose, maturity about 3 or 4 years ago. So it provides support, sort of care and supports for Australians with a permanent significant disability, of whom there's around about 600,000 people in the scheme at the moment. That number's growing, as is well documented. But it was a landmark social reform, I would describe it as, the previous Rudd and Gillard governments implemented, in response to, I guess, a recognition that people with disability were just that they were suffering from inequality, they were being underserved. So it was a huge social reform, often described as the biggest social reform since Medicare. I think you can even make an argument it's a bigger social reform than Medicare in some ways. That does its best to give people with disability, help them achieve better outcomes, live better lives, and reduce some of that inequality that so many of them have systemically experienced.
Yep. So as taxpayers, we all make a contribution to the NDIS, and then the government uses that in the same way it does for Medicare to fund services and supports for people with a disability, and you said a long-term persistent disability. So throughout their lifetime.
Yeah. Not all of our participants are in the scheme for their whole lives, but a great majority of them are. That's right.
Yeah. So what an important role you have then as the scheme actuary. But it sounds like you have, also a lot of scrutiny and a lot of questions, and people want to know answers because it's such a political and widespread a new initiative, I suppose, but with different perspectives on that and how that should be running and operating.
That's exactly right. Look, it probably, I think it's fair to say, Julia, it's one of the most scrutinised government programs. That's for a very legitimate and really good reason, which is that the NDIS touches the lives of our participants. Probably in a lot of ways more than any other government program. So our participants interact with the NDIS and are and benefit from the NDIS, I suppose, more deeply or more broadly across their lives than probably other than is the case with other government programs. And so it's sort of, as you would reasonably expect, participants, they care very deeply about the scheme, and they care very deeply about the scheme being successful. And I guess that's why there is so much reasonable scrutiny on the scheme.
And so what's it like for you being under that scrutiny, David, I mean, you're an actuary, you know, stereotypically as actuaries, we're not the life of the party and in the center of attention. What's that like for you, having a role where you are under so much scrutiny in that role?
Well, look, I think what's important, you know, the work that we undertake, look, it does get scrutiny, but you know, I wouldn't want to say that, you know, the work we in the actuarial team do is sort of more important than the actual design of the scheme and the design of the services that participants receive. I mean, look, it's legitimate that, you know, that the cost of the scheme, you know, attracts attention. As you touched on, it's a you know, it's a substantial investment that the government and taxpayers make. So it's legitimate that there be, you know, a scrutiny and examination of that. But you know, in a way, I suppose that creates understanding and trust amongst you know, amongst people with disability and obviously their representatives and carers, so that ultimately it can just you know, the scheme can continue to be improved in a way that works for them, but you know, and in a way that is financially sustainable, which obviously is very important to the government and to taxpayers.
So it's an important role that you and the team have in supporting that important service and that the scrutiny that comes with that, as you would expect with a government service.
That's
So,
right.
David, can you tell us a bit more about your team? You said that, you know, you've got actuaries in your team. What do they do, and you know, what does your team look like?
Sure. Well, look, but I mean, in total, the team that we have, um, you know, across actuaries, as well as I guess a range of sort of data science, analytics, data sort of services professionals, is you know, it's a couple of hundred people or a little bit more
Wow,
than that. Yeah, yeah. But I guess
it's a big team.
if you think about you know, the size of the scheme, this year we're going to spend about a little over $35 billion. You know, I would argue that that amount of capacity and that level of capability that we have is certainly justified and appropriate for that amount of investment. As I said, you know, we have 600,000 participants. Every one of them is an individual. So the number of different questions and analyses that we can undertake about our participants and around the expenditure, there's a very large number of possible analyses and questions. I think, you know, like any, I suppose, large financial, you know, organization that deals with you know, large amounts of expenditure like that, you know, there's sort of, you need to have an appropriate level of understanding and insight into that, and an ability to sort of then, you know, use the data that we have in a positive way. So you know, as I said, there's you know, there's a large number of actuaries. I guess many of them do what you would consider reasonably, you know, traditional actuarial work, which is, you know, projecting the cost of the scheme, or look, undertaking at times, you know, modelling of scenarios around the cost of the scheme, that sort of thing. But then, you know, some of the actuaries, you know, are involved in, you know, in some of the detailed monitoring that we undertake. I guess that's a reasonably typical activity, and then, you know, look, it's at times working out where we can get more value from the data that we hold. We collect a substantial amount of participant reported data about the outcomes that participants achieve, and understanding better those outcomes and what influences those outcomes, you know, in terms of the services that we provide, is another really, you know, great opportunity that we have. So it really is, there is a broad set of opportunities. There's a sort of, you know, we are lucky, I think, to have access to data, you know, an overall, you know, data asset that I would genuinely say on a global scale is really somewhat unique. And so I think the opportunity that we have, which we need to make sure that we take very seriously, and that we take the appropriate levels of care around the how we use the information. But as long as we do that, I think the opportunity we have to get insight into, you know, what makes a difference for people with disability, and then to try to improve the scheme, is a pretty unique and incredibly important one.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got a large actuarial team because you need people who can analyze that amount of data, the huge amount of data that you're collecting, not just around financial data and costs of things, but also outcomes for people as well. So sounds like some really interesting work that your actuarial team is getting involved in. But I mean, we don't have if we think about our actuarial exams, we don't have, government disability reserving or government outcome modelling. I mean, how did you find yourself working in this area, and what sort of pathway, have the actuaries who work for you taken to be working in this space?
It's fascinating, really, because I think when I started as an actuary, Julia, there was life insurance and general insurance and superannuation investments, and it felt like everything fit pretty neatly into one of those headings. But I guess over the sort of look, I suppose if you went back even at that point, actuaries did a little bit of work in what was then probably called accident compensation, or personal now we probably tend to call it sort of injury insurance. But there's certainly, I think at that point, there was relatively few actuaries working in, maybe what I would also call social insurance. But probably, over my sort of the early parts of my career, I think that there more and more, or there were a large number of actuaries got involved in social insurance. And I just found myself, I suppose, probably 20 to 25 odd years ago, when I was working at PwC, and just sort of found myself, for various reasons, tending to do work on social insurance.
When you say social insurance, David, how would you define that if people are not familiar with that term?
Yeah, sorry, good question. I think it's really, I guess, around, in simple terms, I think it's ensuring or attempting to ensure against poor social outcomes. And so I suppose where that probably started, as I said, was around, or where the term from an actuarial point of view is most longest been used, it would be around workers' compensation and motor vehicle injury insurance. Obviously, since the establishment of the NDIS, I think it certainly includes that. I think in its broader sense, you can think of social insurance as including Medicare, which is a form of social insurance. Sort of other government programs like, sort of, say, for example, job seeker, that you could argue is a form of social insurance. Look, actuaries aren't involved in all of those, although, increasingly, actuaries have played a role across a wide range of government programs, which I think would meet the definition of social insurance.
Yep.
Yeah.
So public programs, public services, initiatives and schemes that are put in place to support and prevent or address bad things from happening to the public.
Yeah, address, that's right. And I think maybe the ones where actuaries, add really probably most value is the ones where you tend to have, long-term, you have long-term recipients. So the NDIS, a large proportion of our participants, as I mentioned, will be with the scheme for life. And so taking that sort of lifetime view and the longitudinal view of our participants, is where I think actuaries really can make a difference because of the skills that we bring.
Yep. So that long-term view, that training that we have around looking at what happens into the future and scenarios around that as well.
Exactly.
Okay, so you came to this through sort of working in social insurance, your consulting work at PwC. Well, what about the actuaries in your team now? How have they found themselves working in this space? How did they get the skills that they needed to do this sort of work?
Well, there's a really is a wide variety, and like I said, I think from the point when I started in my career, there wasn't really an opportunity like the NDIS. But look, we actually have we have a number of graduates who come in and work with us each year. So some of our people start their career with us.
Right.
We're as I said, we employ close to 100 actuaries as well as the data scientists and professionals. So we bring in a decent number of graduates each year. But we also have people who've come to us from a range of backgrounds. So we do have quite a few people who've started their career in life insurance, and there are some sort of, at least some some similarities between, you know, some of the work that happens in life insurance and in disability. I mean, disability is a term that's used in life insurance, although usually a different specific meaning. You know, we have a lot of people who've had various stints in consulting. Some of them have done work that, you know, relates quite closely to what we do. So, some, you know, perhaps say they've had more of a career in general insurance, for example. But look, I think a lot of the, you know, the skills that our people have gained, whatever that background is, you know, there's applicability. And, you know, and I think the other comment I would just make, you know, and this applies, you know, to myself as well as my team, I do think there's a very strong sense of purpose that comes with doing work where we really can see that connection to, you know, to the participants, you know, in our case, to the sort of the people with disability in Australia. And so I think that, you know, whatever path our people have followed to sort of end up working with us, there's almost always, I think, that strong connection to the difference that we hopefully make.
Amazing. So it sounds like you've got quite a diverse range of actuaries who are bringing their transferable skills from a whole range of different sort of professional backgrounds and able to come to the NDIA and make a difference. Okay. So given this sort of diversity of role and, you know, the ability to make a difference in, you know, working for the NDIS, what's the most interesting part of your role, David? What do you enjoy most about what you're doing there at the NDIS?
Oh, I love this question because it just gets me it gives me a chance just to talk about, you know, what I'm passionate about. I mean, and I guess the way I'd answer it initially is to say I describe my role often as sort of 20 or 30% technical and 70 or 80% about stakeholders and about the sort of communication. And so a really big part of my role is communicating the work we do to a wide range, wide-ranging audience, which includes government, you know, some of the departments, the central agencies, but probably, you know, in some ways, at least more importantly, involves working a lot with people in the disability sector to help them understand what's happening in the scheme and what we expect to happen in the scheme and why that's happening. And I enjoy it because you know, I think what I appreciate having worked in the scheme for a while is just how important it is that you know, that people in the disability sector, participants, their families, carers, representative organisations, all, you know, understand and have buy-in to the direction of the scheme. And so, for me, being able to play a role in that, I mean, it's by no means just myself. The whole agency, you know, the senior leadership of the agency, you know, all have a role in that. But to at least be a part of some of those really important conversations we have with people in the disability sector, and to really be able to hopefully see them, you know, them understand, you know, where we're at, what's happening, why it's happening, and to be able to genuinely, I mean, not just be a one-way sort of flow of information of us talking to them, but them, you know, genuinely asking us questions and making us think differently, and probably leading to us doing different analyses and asking different questions. And you know, I think being a part of that really genuine sort of the ownership that you know, that our participants and everyone in the sector has of the scheme, I find it incredibly rewarding. And it's probably not something that I guess in, you know, how would I put it? You know, it's a bit of a unique, well, not unique completely, but it's certainly one of the aspects of this role that, you know, that I enjoy. And look, you know, I guess a number of my team also have roles in that too. So, you know, I guess it is the scheme, as I said, it's an incredibly important social reform. But it's something, I think what's a big part of that is that it is not done to people with disability, you know, by the government. It is done with people with in a very, very genuine, co-designed, collaborative way with people with disability. And it's great to be able to be part of that.
Fantastic. It's so exciting to see that collaboration actually happening in action. That, you know, it sounds like your role is not just about managing a team of actuaries, it's about managing a team of actuaries and engaging with a whole lot of stakeholders, not just at a government level, but at a public level too. You're facilitating that collaboration and co-design, and ensuring that what you are building is not just something that's being built in a vacuum. It's actually being built with input from people who need it, and that's
100. No, and I think that's something that, you know, that's when governments, I mean, you know, I'm getting a little tiny bit political here, but I just think that's when governments work best, you know, when you know, the sort of the people, the people who government, you know, are working for and working, supporting, you know, that they have the right voice.
Yep.
I couldn't say strongly enough how important that is.
Yep. Yeah, sounds really important. So, okay, and you said that, you know, your role is maybe 20 to 30% technical and the rest is stakeholder management and communication. Just since I'm teaching communication to actuaries at the moment, I'd love it if you could share maybe a tip or a strategy or like something that you would like to share with listeners around building communication skills. How did you get to the point where you were able to have this communication skills to do the kind of work that you're doing?
Well, look, you know, I think the one thing I would certainly say, you know, that there's a great quote from George Bernard Shaw. I might not get it exactly right, but it's like the biggest mistake with communication is thinking it's ever done. You know, something along those lines. I think it's recognizing in any role where you're sort of dealing a lot with people that, you know, it's something that you don't just do once. You know, it's ongoing. I think that with I think one thing I observe, if I reflect on my career and think about, you know, my journey, my communications journey, I do think that myself, and this is probably the case for not all, but, you know, a reasonable number of actuaries, you know, I think our training is often about, you know, it's about really making sure that we have a lot of detail, we understand a lot of detail. And I think what then goes with that often is we have an inclination or an instinct towards demonstrating that detail in verbal communication. And I think there's times when that's completely appropriate and, you know, for certain audiences, but, you know, for the sort of audiences that I've touched on, you know, for people, you know, the people who aren't actuaries by background, you know, I think there is just a less is more sort of overall mantra I try to hold to, sometimes more successfully than others. But you know, the reality is that with a scheme this large, you know, with this amount of this much data, this many participants, that much expenditure, there's, you know, there's always so many different ways you can look at the data, so many ways you can cut it. You're never going to be able to communicate all of that in a way, you know, that's comprehensive. So you need to sort of accept that you need to kind of communicate a certain level, and then just sort of essentially that and allow people to go on their own journey with the information. So I think it's something that, as I said, I feel I've been very lucky in my career with the sort of some of the roles I've had to really be able to learn from some really great communicators and reflect on my own journey. But it's something that I think you never stop learning, and I would really encourage all actuaries to just sort of, you know, to take that, you know, in a really positive and genuine way, and just reflect on the fact that there is always that opportunity.
Yeah, great advice to keep learning, keep learning, and less is more. I love that. So we've talked a lot about your role, the NDIS, the NDIA, and your team of actuaries and how you've all gotten there. We've talked about what you love about it. Is there anything that you find challenging or difficult that you'd like to share?
Oh, look, I mean, I think that it's a sort of, in a sense, the that you know, that deep passion, the deep level of interest that so many stakeholders have in the scheme, just the size of the scheme, the scale of it. I guess what it means is that there is an immense hunger and demand for information, you know, and there's so many questions that so many different people can have, and I think being able to manage all of that demand and to be able to meet people, as many people, you know, the needs of as many stakeholders as possible, but with what is, even though we have a large team, it is not unlimited. So I just think managing the sort of the volume of the appetite that exists both within our agency. I mean, we have like the agency that the National Disability Insurance Agency is, has got a workforce of 12 or 13,000 people. So there's plenty of demand from within the agency, but then from outside the agency as well. I think it's what we need to do. One of the challenge, I suppose, is to I suppose there's a prioritization challenge about what's most important. But within that, as I said, maintaining trust, maintaining making sure that stakeholders just understand that even if we can't get to their request now, that it doesn't mean it's not important. That whole challenge is one, we can never we can never meet everyone's needs perfectly, but we just need to keep trying to do our best.
And I guess it's that double-edged sword when you've got work that's so important and so meaningful, because you do feel invested. You do feel like you want to answer those questions, and everyone has a valid question that they're asking as well. But how do you prioritize those requests and triage those requests and still sort of make sure that you're getting the most value with what you've got?
And just sort of, make sure that I'm looking after my amazing people really well, because they're, as I said, they're so passionate. They all want to do a great job, but the risk of that level of demand we have is that it means that there's a risk that that our people, we push them too hard, and so really trying to make sure that we're sort of balancing all of those, balance the need to keep our stakeholders happy and being able to do what we can to support them, but also to be to make sure that the team's being well looked after. Which I mean, as I said, it's challenging, but it's incredibly rewarding.
Yeah. So to wrap up, David, I just want to ask you, for anyone listening who's thinking about maybe considering a career in social services, or maybe even working with your team at the NDIA, what's one tip that you would give them if they're thinking about making that move?
Thank you, Juliet. Look, I think it's kind of, in a way, it might sound a little trite. It's the same for any job, but I think just having a keen interest and just doing at least a little bit of research into the NDIS. I mean, there is an immense amount of information out there about us, so it's not that hard to do, although in a way that immense amount of information can be a bit overwhelming. Look, as I touched on, I don't feel that from a sort of a technical point of view, the skills that you need in for working for us or elsewhere in social services are particularly unique. I mean, there's a few things that are a little different, but not in such a way that sort of most actuaries, I think, or virtually all actuaries, couldn't make the transition relatively easily. So a lot of it really, I just think it comes down to the the actual the subject matter itself, and just that sort of having a curiosity around it, which I observe so many actuaries do. I think it's fair to say that, as I said, over my career, the role that actuaries have played, whether it be for the NDIS or in other social services, sort of examples, use cases, whatever you want to say. I mean, it's evolved a lot. It's grown a lot. And who knows in sort of 10 to 15 to 20 years time what it will look like. So I think it really it's kind of general career advice in a way, but I think it is still helpful just to sort of you're always going to be a more sort of we always love people who really have a passion for what we do and have a sort of at least a little bit of an understanding of it. So I do encourage people just to do that bit of research, and I do. And finally, I guess I just say, as I said, I would encourage I'd encourage actuaries out there, particularly those in the early stages of their career, just to really recognise the range of opportunities that now exist, which I do think is wonderful. We are one really good one. There's a lot of other great ones out there too. But yeah.
That's great. So regardless of our technical background or professional background, if we've got an interest and a passion in the space and we can spend the time learning the domain knowledge, then there's an opportunity to create a path for ourselves into this sort of work as well. So that's really great advice. David, thank you so much for your time today. I'm sure your advice will really resonate with so many of our listeners.
Thank you, Julia. Lovely to be able to talk to you. Really appreciate it. And hi to all of your audience.
Thanks, David.
Okay.